This is TWiT.
I tweeted an article a couple of days ago that got more comments, more back and forth on Twitter than perhaps anything I've ever tweeted. And it is a fairly controversial article, but I thought we'd bring it up. It's from Quartz, Steve Blank. His headline is probably more annoying than the rest of the article. Steve Jobs' worst decision was promoting Tim Cook. Oh, that's kind of mean.
Doesn't send Apple number 374 in the series.
Most of the article seems to be about Steve Ballmer, actually, and why, despite the fact that he, doubled profits, tripled sales at Microsoft, he was considered a failed leader, mostly because he missed all of the, he maintained the fiefdom, Microsoft's dominance in operating systems, but he missed mobile search. He missed mobile. He missed the cloud. And as a result, his successor, Satya Nadella, had to really work hard to play catch-up and has done, to his credit, a very good job. And I think, if you take off the Steve Ballmer stuff, Steve Blank's point in this article is that there's two kinds of CEOs. There are operations guys who keep the trains running on time. They keep things working. They continue to build value. They continue to, build the company. And then there's the visionary. Of course, Steve Jobs is the king of visionaries. And Tim Cook is an operations guy, but not so much a visionary. Agree or disagree? Discuss, class.
I don't know. These articles. Go ahead, Andy.
I think it's okay for there to be an operations guy at the very, very head, because that means that the people below you who can be the visionaries, who can be the let's make a banana-shaped laptop computer, let's do an operating system that's all based on round pixels. It's okay, so you can let those birds fly free throughout the campus, and then at the head there's an operations guy that will say that there is no way we could ramp up production on screens with round pixels. There's no way we can supply it. There's no way we can manufacture it. At the end of the day, it becomes any company is about taking ideas and putting them in the hands of actual people. So long as the operations guy isn't saying that I don't understand this idea and therefore we can't do it, so long as he's the person saying this is a great idea, but we can't do it for 3 years to make sure that we can actually build enough, we can actually do this correctly, and we won't have to reject one out of every 3 panels that we buy with this strange banana shape, I think it's okay. And also, we can have lots of debates. We certainly have had lots of debates about whether Apple is being daring and innovative enough. However, you can't deny that they are hands down making products that people like and people will line up to buy. So I find it hard to find failure in his tenure so far.
We should mention this was originally an article in the Harvard Business Review. Go ahead, Renee. And then I want to play the Steve Jobs video that Blank includes in his article on his blog, because it's Steve Jobs talking about this very thing. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the thing about this is there's a lot of people who just don't understand Apple. I'm not saying that as an insult. It's just you have to do a lot of very, very hard work to get a baseline understanding of how Apple operates as an organization, because it's not built the way many other companies is. And that's not an excuse. It's just you have to do your homework. And a lot of these are bad at perspective taking. It's somebody who has an opinion about how things should be done, and when things don't conform to that, they're obviously wrong. You can see that a lot of the times when people blame Tim Cook for things that were started and shepherded under Steve Jobs. These were decisions that Steve Jobs made that came to fruition under Tim Cook in largely the way that Steve Jobs wanted them, and Steve Jobs would never have done that. The nice thing about this is there is no other Steve Jobs. We've heard Jeff Bezos called Steve Jobs, but he made the Fire Phone. We've heard most recently Evan Spangler called Steve Jobs, and he made the Spectacle. I mean, everyone is quick to anoint a new Steve Jobs, but there really isn't one. And there was certainly nobody at Apple who had product vision who also wanted to run the company. Steve Jobs wanted to run Apple because he believed the best way to be a product visionary was to make every decision himself. And a lot of other people just don't want to do that. They want the freedom, like Johnny Ives, to be able to go and build a building for a year or 2 years and not have to worry about the day-to-day running of a company. And that's just not anyone at Apple right now. So you have Tim Cook, who's the person, famously, Steve Jobs thought of the iPad. Tim Cook got it so they could sell it for $500. And that's the person you have running the company. And to Andy's point, that allows everyone else from Johnny Ive to Phil Schiller to the hardware and software teams to dream all the dreams they want because they know the bottom line is taken care of. And these articles are always just stupefying to me because I read them and my eyes literally cannot roll hard enough.
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully agree with you or disagree with him because there's no question Tim is a different kind of manager. And I guess to your point, Andy, maybe that the Johnny Ive was supposed to take that role as visionary. So maybe you blame Johnny Ive for not. I mean, and I have to say, I mean, Johnny has a particular point of view that has served Apple, but may not serve it in the future. It's hard for me to.
It's always a blessing and a curse. Your culture is always a blessing and a curse.
Here's the Steve. Let me just play this.
People get confused. Companies get confused. When they start getting bigger, they want to replicate their initial success. And a lot of them think, well, somehow there's some magic in the process of how that success was created. So they start to try to institutionalize process across the company. And before very long, people get very confused that the process is the content. And that's ultimately the downfall of IBM. IBM has the best process people in the world. They just forgot about the content. And that's what happened a little bit at Apple, too. We had a lot of people who were great at management process. They just didn't have a clue as to the content. And in my career, I found that the best people, are the ones that really understand the content, and they're a pain in the butt to manage, But you put up with it because they're so great at the content. And that's what makes great products. It's not process, it's content.
So what do you think? So I think that's actually, I really liked that quote from Steve Jobs. It's funny because it sounds like Apple went through this in the very early days when the success, and I bet they did with the success of the Apple II.
And then he made Apple University. He turned around and made Apple University.
Well, but what also happens is Steve celebrated and understood destruction. He celebrated chaos. He created quite a bit of his own chaos.
Ask Scully. Ask anybody he had a response
and
to.
Any good CEO. Well, I don't know. It depends on the measure of good, but many CEOs consider that to be a bad thing and want to push that out.
Well, it's first of all, you have to understand. When I listen to that, I also think about the context of the time at Apple he was talking about that sort of stuff. He was talking about a time when really the kind of boring computers he was talking about were Apple's life's blood. Apple was still making all of its money off of the Apple IIe, and it was industry leader, was where all the action was happening. When they launched Macintosh, it was a colossal failure financially for a number of years. He went off and started Next, and that was a colossal failure until they were bought out by Apple. All the ideas were good, but those ideas had not proven themselves to be a good business at that time. So I would just have it just reminds us all to think about how you really do have to maintain a sort of a yin and a yang to be a good CEO. I think the best ones will have one foot in that sort of, well, what if we do this? And isn't this an interesting idea? And well, there's no market for this, but this is a great idea and we need to explore it. And also, here is what people are buying. Here is what people are buying: wheat bread. And we can start making some sort of weird liver-flavored ciabatta because we think that that's innovative and that's new. But meanwhile, people are lining up to buy wheat bread. So maybe we should try to have a line of breads that have the weird stuff, but also address what people actually want and they think they need.
Yeah, I think, though, there are a lot of Apple fans and Apple lovers who look at what Apple's goals are today, and they are less than enthused. I think from the inside, it's probably horrible to have the chaos, but from the outside, we'd like to see the product of the chaos, maybe.
Also, your memories, like now is always painful, and the past is always rosy. And we go back and you think about Mobile Me, and you think about, just some of the things that happened under Steve Jobs. Like, oh, this would never have happened. He was, but what I think you have here is similar to what happened to Pixar, where you get a normalization where you don't have the highest highs, but you also don't have the lowest lows. And some people really miss those giant highs, like the iPhone introduction, the iPad introduction, and it's just not the same. And Tim Cook isn't sort of the singular auteur line item veto guy. He lets Eddie Q and Phil Schiller and Craig Federighi and Dan Riccio and all those people run their organizations almost as if they're little companies. And Apple's gotten so big, they really are. Like Angela Ahrendts' Apple Store really is a little company in its own right, and he more kind of shepherds a process. And whether you need that because Apple is so much bigger or not is debatable. But they are very different people. They have very different management styles, and the partnership Steve and Johnny had was not replicatable. You couldn't just slot anybody else into that. So I think it was a sort of, Tim is really good at this, and the other people will, at least the hope is that they will fill in around him. Sort of like when Steve Jobs famously came back and made that grid, personal, professional, laptop, desktop. Tim very famously said software, services, hardware, and put everything in its place.
Yeah.